The moderator for this afternoon's program is Antonia Juhasz. Antonia is a leading energy and climate author and investigative journalist. She's the senior researcher on fossil fuels in the environment and human rights division of Human Rights Watch. An award-winning writer, her bylines include Rolling Stone, Newsweek, National Geographic, Zeke Magazine, the New York Times, the Los Angeles Times, the Atlantic, the Guardian, and many more. And she's the author of 3 books: Black Tide, The Devastating Impact of the Gulf Oil Spill, The Tyranny of Oil, and The Bush Agenda, Invading the World One Economy at a Time. So it gives me great pleasure to turn this over to Antonia.
Thank you so much, Glenn, and welcome everyone. It's such a pleasure to be back with Zeke, and this is the second panel that I'm moderating on behalf of Zeke Magazine. I had the pleasure, as Glenn said, of writing for Zeke, and I am a huge supporter and really happy to be here with you. Thank you for hosting us, Glenn. Thank you for organizing us, Justin, and thank you for all of you for being here. I really want to encourage anyone who feels comfortable doing so to turn on your camera. We'd love to see you and love to have this be an opportunity for meeting and greeting and sharing. And we do want to hear from you. Please tell us where you're from on the chat. Please be ready to ask your questions or put them in the chat. We're looking forward to a really fruitful discussion. And I think that's the only housekeeping. I have the incredible pleasure of moderating this panel and introducing our speakers, and also to welcome you to this critical moment. I cannot think of a more critical time for photography, documentary photography, photojournalism, to be trying to capture the critical moment we are in the climate crisis, and to provide critical narrative that grasps an audience, creates a sense of meaning and impact, and brings the stories of those directly impacted and those directly resisting the harms of the climate crisis and the causes of the climate crisis to bear. The visuals that you will see do all of this and more. The crisis that we are in is a human crisis, an environmental crisis, a species crisis, an existential crisis. It's one that many people have a difficult time trying to wrap their heads around. And not only what it looks like, what it means, what it feels like, but I think most importantly, what can be done about it, and how to turn personal experiences into a sense of the ability to act as a group and as a whole to confront such a difficult situation. I worked as an investigative journalist for a very long time. I now have the privilege and pleasure of working at Human Rights Watch, as Glenn said, as the senior researcher on fossil fuels in the Environment and Human Rights Division, where much of my job is about research, investigation, and the narrative, how to tell the critical stories of the human rights abuses that we confront at the point of fossil fuel production and extraction, and at the point of the worsening climate crisis. And I had the unbelievable privilege of working with Eli Reed, one of our presenters, on my first report for Human Rights Watch, which I am going to share in the chat, and which Eli will share directly from in his presentation. But I think this was an opportunity to bring together these different pieces of research, investigation, writing, narrative, and then the incredible, powerful visual artistry that Eli's documentary photographer brought to bring the people on the front lines of this human rights crisis to viewers, and to give them the life and the meaning that the words and the investigation absolutely could not do alone. So thank you, Eli, for working with us in Louisiana. We have 3 incredible storytellers with us, and the order that you'll be hearing from them. And also, I wanted to include the link so that you can see their bios in the chat. I'm going to do that now as well. And then I forgot, I also did want to share that the report, which I just shared with you, also just last night was featured on the PBS NewsHour, which I am extremely excited about and wanted to share that with you as well. Some of the people whose images you'll see that Eli is going to be presenting are also featured in that coverage. In order of speaking, we'll first hear from Katie Orlinsky. And Katie is a photographer who's been featured in National Geographic, the New York Times, the New Yorker, the Smithsonian. She's won numerous awards from institutions such as the Art Directors Club, PDN 30, Visa pour l'Image, and Pictures of the Year International, and was named the 2016 Paris Match Female Photojournalist of the Year. Since 2014, she's been working on a long-term photographic project exploring how climate change is challenging communities across Alaska and transforming the relationship between people, animals, and the land. She's received many prestigious grants, including from the National Geographic Society, Magnum Foundation, Getty Images, the International Women's Media Foundation, and the Pulitzer Center for Crisis Reporting. Katie will present first, and just before I go on with the introductions, on another note on housekeeping, each photographer will present and share some images. Then we'll have time for 1 or 2 questions after their presentation. Then we'll go on to the next photographer, have time for 1 or 2 questions, but then have a bulk of half an hour or so at the end to really field questions and discussion. So you can either jot down your questions or ask a quick one after a photographer has presented, but know that the bulk of our time for discussion will come at the end after each photographer has presented. So after Katie, we're going to hear from Eli Reed, who for over half a century, photojournalist Eli Reed's photography has captured the face of racism and documented human suffering in conflicts around the world. He has photographed deprivation from Beirut to Central America and filmed the Lost Boys of Sudan, young men Reed described as living through life-threatening hell. In the United States, his eyes have been focused on the evils of racism, his photographs exposing truth in ways that words cannot always express, including his photographs of the aftermath of George Floyd's 2020 murder in Minneapolis and his funeral in Houston, Texas. Reed was a 1983 Neiman Fellow at Harvard, became a full member of Magnum Photos in 1988, and retired in 2021 after teaching for 17 years at the University of Texas at Austin. Among his many awards are the National Press Photographers Association Joseph A. Sprague Memorial Award, Gordon Parks Choice of Weapons Award, and the I.F. Stone Medal for Journalistic Independence. While on assignment for Human Rights Watch, Eli has been documenting human suffering in Louisiana, an area that has come to be known as Cancer Alley, photographing for the report We're Dying Here, the Fight for Life in Louisiana in a Louisiana Fossil Fuel Sacrifice Zone. Following Eli's presentation, we're going to hear from Jamey Stillings. Jamey. Jamey's multi-decade career spans documentary, fine art, and commissioned work. Since 2010, he's focused on renewable energy through an extended aerial photography project, Changing Perspectives, Renewable Energy and the Shifting Human Landscape. Stillings has photographed extensively over the United States, Japan, Uruguay, and Chile from helicopters and light airplanes. He recently published Atacama, Renewable Energy and Mining in the High Desert of Chile. Recent publications include the New York Times Magazine, National Geographic, Der Spiegel, Le Monde, Newsweek, Japan, Wired, Italia, and Photo World China. His award-winning book, The Evolution of Ivanpah Solar, documents the Ivanpah Solar concentrated solar power plant in California's Mojave Desert. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us, and I'm going to turn over our event to Katie Orlinsky.
Thank you so much. Thanks very much. Wonderful to be here. Yeah, really excited about this. Also big fan of Eli and Jamey's work, so I'm really honored to be presenting with them. So I'm just gonna get started. I'm gonna share my screen. Are we good to go? Okay. Great. So today I'm going to share a story that is called Vanishing Caribou. I've been working on this project for about 3 years, but it was just in National Geographic in the December issue, but it is something that I've been dreaming about photographing ever since my first trip up north. So in 2014, I got this completely random assignment to photograph a 1,000-mile dog sled race. And I grew up in New York City. And up until that point, I'd been covering mostly news and conflict, sort of like spot news stories, working a lot in Latin America. And I had never imagined myself working in the Arctic wilderness. But the minute I arrived up north, I was completely blown away. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. And I was experiencing it through this incredible relationship between people and animals. In this instance, it was sled dogs. But I soon learned that this was just one tradition stemming from an entire way of life for Indigenous communities in the Arctic. These are places that I've now been returning to for almost a decade, where the calendar year revolves around subsistence hunting, and the climate crisis is transforming the relationship between people, animals, and the land. And so this brings me to caribou, which are one of the most important animals for Indigenous communities in the Arctic. Caribou are the wild North American cousins of an animal we all know, reindeer, and the difference between them is about 7,000 years of reindeer domestication. Caribou, on the other hand, are completely wild. And so over the last 20 years, Arctic caribou populations have been in shocking decline. They've gone from 5 million animals to now 2 million and falling. There hasn't been a disappearance of so many large land mammals in such a short period of time since the American bison. So this is a devastating loss, and it threatens to unravel the delicate ecosystem of the Arctic, as well as the food security and cultural practices of Indigenous communities across Alaska and Canada. And so these are people for whom caribou means everything, like the Nunavut community of Anaktuvuk Pass, which is seen here on Easter Sunday. Anaktuvuk means the place of many caribou droppings, and this village is located right along the migration path of the Western Arctic caribou herd in Alaska's Brooks Range. And so at the end of church that day, they prayed for their community's health and well-being, but they also prayed for the caribou and their soon-to-be-born calves. Even Jesus rides a caribou in Anaktuvuk Pass. And so this village was only founded in 1957, which is when the Bureau of Indian Affairs forced the Nunavut to settle into a single village site. Before that, they were nomadic, and their homes and their way of life would revolve around the caribou migration. This is Frances Lamp, and she's just outside her Aunt Casey's home. And inside Casey's home, she's processing a caribou her brother just hunted for her, as her 1-year-old daughter, Ellie Lou, watches on. And so caribou is the single most important source of fresh food and protein in Anaktuvuk Pass. This community is located completely off the road system, and all groceries have to be flown in. This is Mark Morey with his granddaughter Jade, and he's having some caribou soup there on the left. And so Mark was a legendary hunter in his day, and even now he would be able to just look out the window and tell me and the writer I worked on this story with, Neil Shea, who I should have mentioned sooner, and he would just be able to tell us where the caribou were going to be and how they were going to behave. And so he's part of the last generation of Nunavut people who lived completely off the land and migrated with the animals themselves. And so Mark said that for most of his life, the migrations were predictable. Thousands of caribou flowed through town, traveling north in the spring and returning in the fall. But for the last 5 years, they haven't come through in the fall at all. And so scientists think this is most likely due to climate change delaying caribou's migratory patterns, which are triggered by weather. But Mark and community members have another theory. So Nunavut hunters have a sacred tradition of always letting the first wave of caribou pass through the valley undisturbed. This way, the leaders, who are generally healthy females, will make it where they're going, and they'll remember the route they took is a good one, and then they'll use it again and again. And then the hunters will pursue the caribou who arrive later. Sports hunters, on the other hand, never follow this practice. They shoot at the first animals they see, and they spook the rest. So the lack of fall caribou means that the spring hunt is more important than ever. This is the only opportunity for families to get the meat that's going to feed them for the year to come. This is Clyde Morey. He's a really skilled hunter, just like his dad. And that's good because that spring, the temperatures were between like -30, it even reached -60. So only very experienced hunters could stay safe out there. But what means misery for humans are ideal conditions for caribou. Caribou have an entire circulatory system that's uniquely adapted to the extreme cold. So this group was grazing on a day that was so cold, no one would even go hunting. Clyde wasn't even hunting. The only people dumb enough to go out there were me and Neil. And then thankfully it warmed up a few weeks later. And so some younger, less seasoned hunters like 12-year-old Gerald here made their way into the mountains. So Gerald processed an entire caribou, and then him and his cousins distributed the meat around town to elders. And I was just so impressed with the youth in Anaktuvuk Pass. This is a place, you know, they've got video games and iPads and everything that kids have everywhere else, but, you know, they kind of have the gumption to get together, go out and go hunting, a bunch of 12 to 15-year-olds. So I was just, the youth in that community were extremely impressive. And I think part of that is that they really prioritize passing on traditional knowledge and skills to the younger generation. They even have a class every year, a special class in school that teaches caribou butchering and hide processing for the kids who might not have access to that kind of knowledge at home. And so this is the cultural studies teacher, Evelyn, and she was teaching her students the Inupiaq names for caribou parts. Like the tutu is caribou in Inupiaq, and this is the niakuk, which is head. So, and I'll just talk about another community that I worked with in Alaska that also has a really, really long held and strong relationship with caribou. And that's the Gwich'in Indigenous community of Arctic Village. And it's located right on the border of the National Arctic Wildlife Refuge, and it's home to the porcupine caribou herd. And this is the only herd in basically all of the north that is not shrinking, but is actually growing. So I visited them during their spring carnival. So this is when caribou are migrating through town and everyone gets together for games like a bubblegum blowing competition here. And then later in the day, a caribou head skinning competition. And so in Arctic Village, they think that the heads and the tongues are the most delicious part of the animal, which is not the case in Anaktuvuk Pass. Everywhere has just a really, although they all have these strong relationships with caribou, they're very different in a lot of different ways. And so the Gwich'in are known as the caribou people. As Gwich'in elder Sarah James says, caribou are not just what we eat, they're who we are. They're in our stories and songs and the whole way we see the world. Caribou are our life. This is Carlos. He's a hunter and one of the many Gwich'in activists like Sarah James who've been fighting against oil development and drilling in the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge. And so far, they've been successful. So spring migration is afoot, and these pregnant porcupine caribou are about to begin their long march toward their calving grounds on the coastal plain. The caribou migration is the longest of any terrestrial migration on the planet, and these animals will travel hundreds, sometimes thousands of miles. And then another incredible thing about caribou is that they can be in groups hundreds of miles apart, but when it's time to migrate, tens of thousands of animals move in unison like a single organism, and they all come together to begin their migration. And they even have a built-in compass like migratory birds. And they've also been following the same routes for millennia down to the very same trails. And you can see evidence of this in the tundra, where there'll be these indentations that are about as deep as a person standing up. How are we on time? I wasn't paying attention. Am I still good? Okay. All right, so we will continue. So now we're gonna keep going. We're gonna talk about the migration a bit and get to early summer. So caribou have given birth and the snow is melted and the rivers are overflowing. And so as they continue migrating north across the landscape, caribou distribute nutrients. So they feed humans, as we talked about, but they're also feeding wolves, bears, and other creatures. Their bones and antler sheds even provide calcium for rodents, and then the passage of their hooves stirs up the tundra soil and promotes plant growth. So elders would talk about caribou as if they were an expression of the landscape itself, a reflection of the entire ecosystem. So the following summer, I returned again to photograph the caribou, and I went to Nunavut and Inupiaq lands to photograph the Western Arctic caribou herd, which is the herd that's in such shocking decline. Since 2003, it's gone from 500,000 animals to 188,000. So a quarter of those losses have happened in only the last 3 years. And so in late July, the herd moves to windy, high altitude areas to avoid mosquitoes, and they'll aggregate in groups as large as 50,000. So this is something I tried to photograph for 2 years. This is why I had to go back again. It took a long time to do this story, and it always went wrong. I'd hire guides, but that kind of didn't work out. I had a plane and the plane broke down one time. One time we just couldn't find the caribou. So it was always a mess. But then this summer, I made this one last attempt, flew to this crazy terrain, and you can only land a plane that's like a certain kind of bush plane that's so small that it could only fit me and my gear. So I went by myself. And so the plan was, if I could find the caribou, the plane would drop me off, and then I'd follow them on foot, camping and hiking for days by myself. I'd never done anything like that. And then finally, after those 2 years of trying, I think we saw the entire Western Arctic caribou herd. And elders would talk about how caribou are like bugs on the landscape, and I never quite understood it until seeing this. So that was really incredible to finally see what they meant. And so it's hard to imagine when you see this many animals, they could possibly go extinct. But that is the reality that we're facing. And I do have some positive news, though. So yesterday, the Biden administration just said no to this road that they were trying to build that was going to cut right through the Western Arctic herd's migration path, basically kind of this image you're seeing here. So that's just extremely exciting. I think some people know about the Willow decision, which was really disappointing. And so I don't think we were expecting this. There's been a lot of activism for it, but yeah, so they were going to try to build this road that would cut right through their migration path. It would affect fisheries, caribou, Athabascan and Inupiat communities. And they just said no. Granted, we don't know who's going to be president next, if they're going to try to continue to build this road. But right now, that sort of feels like a really positive thing for the caribou and the people who rely on them. And then also, part of this is that, state officials and scientists won't come out and say it. There's no sort of like definitive reason why the caribou are in decline. There's a variety of factors, but all of the signs point to the fact that disruptions to the landscape, so things like logging, mining, and oil development, have a really big impact on caribou migration and on caribou decline. So then I want to end with a couple more hopeful elements of this story, which is that the Quincy-Zaw caribou herd, this is a caribou herd that used to fill the old growth forests in British Columbia, which is home to the West Moberly and Saulteaux First Nations in Canada. But 10 years ago, only 16 Quincy-Zaw caribou remained. And so in 2013, they began this maternity pen program. So they capture and collar pregnant female caribous in the spring. They relocate them to a large mountaintop enclosure where they can monitor the health of the moms and the newborn calves. And then at the end of the summer, once these calves have their legs under them and the moms are fat and healthy, they're released back into the wild. And so this project has been a huge success. The herd has gone from 16 caribou to 114 caribou. And the Saulteaux and West Moberly secured a landmark conservation agreement that protects over 3,000 square miles of caribou habitat a few years ago. And then one other example, another Indigenous-led conservation initiative that's breaking ground in Canada. For thousands of years, the Clecho tribe has hunted the Bathurst caribou herd in Northwest Territories. And sadly, this herd has completely collapsed. And in 2015, the tribal government made this difficult decision to institute a hunting ban, but they didn't let this sever their ties with the animal. Instead, they began a groundbreaking community science program called Ekwo Nashwati K. This translates to boots on the ground. So this program brings elders, community members, and youth together. So they'll practice the skills of hunting, but without the final fatal shot. They'll monitor, count, photograph, track caribou, and then they manage the species with their own data, not the government's. And so this program encourages a crucial aspect of the Clecho relationship with caribou, simply being with them on the landscape that shapes them both. And so working on this story, what's become crystal clear to me is that if we want to save the caribou, we have to look and listen to the people who know them best. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Katie. That was beautiful. And can we have time for one question? If any, I see one from Glenn in the chat. If anyone else would like to put a question in the chat or raise your hand, feel free, or you can also save questions for the end when we'll have more time after each of the presenters have presented. Just want to give a moment for people's brains to churn. I'll start with Glenn's question. I mean, I've also reported from these communities in Alaska, and I really appreciate you capturing these gorgeous images. And, as you say, with the youth, it's life and death having access to the caribou. It's food, it's clothing, it's shelter, and learning how to do this young is critical for survival. Can you talk more about the stories you heard about the dependence on the caribou, and adding Glenn's question, how the decline has affected these communities?
Yeah, and it's so important culturally and also just for mental health, sense of purpose. So it really is real food that people need to eat. They need the protein that's so expensive to get things from the grocery store and get them flown in. Also for elders, they really need the hunted foods. It's been studied by scientists that that they actually that they need that to survive. They get sick without it. So there's so many factors like cultural, spiritual, um, just community building, and then with climate change, we're seeing it's more difficult. Not only are the animals not showing up, but just reaching them is hard. The snow's melting or the permafrost is thawing. Sea ice gets more and more dangerous. So yeah, so I think it's like what I and I they realize that in these communities, so they're really focusing on teaching the younger generation before, so these skills aren't lost and they're ready to adapt, because they're they're such brilliant people. They're gonna figure out how to adapt, but they're going to have to so quickly, with all the changes that are coming.
Ask one more question before we move on. You talked about some of the challenges. Are there any other key challenges that you confronted in terms of trying to tell this story, not just logistical, but sort of how to wrap your head around such a complex story and
Oh,
how to visualize it?
yeah, and I never was a wildlife photographer till I started doing this story. So animals are just like they don't care if you're there or not. They don't, they don't follow a schedule. And like patience isn't something, I don't know, I feel like patience isn't necessarily a thing I guess I'm that good at. So it just, you have to, and I think they sense when you're desperate. So it's like if you're out there and you want to see them so badly, I feel like they know, and they like will hide from you because you have bad vibes. So it's like it's almost always when I'm not expecting it, or if I'm with local people. So I completely relied on local people, on hunters, to see the animals, to be around them. They know them so well. And when I would be working in seasons where they're not as interested in being around the animals, that was when all the challenges would happen. But it was, working with people was, it's also, it takes time, so much time to gain people's trust. And there's a lot of history of, having negative connotations with journalism and with environmentalism, sort of due to kind of misguided environmental activism that happened about 20 years ago, that I think people are really trying to remedy and understand that, indigenous people are, are consuming these creatures and they're taking care of them because of that. Like it's their backyard, it's their breadbasket. It's a question of respect that they eat the animals. And I think that's so hard to understand coming from a Western perspective, where you see animals, already packaged in plastic. So, but this is such kind of a closer relationship with them. But I think that sort of difference is starting to get better, and people are starting to work together, just because of the climate crisis requires it. So kind of these two sides that might not have been, so allied 20 years ago are now working together a lot more, which is really helpful, to do this kind of work. But also, there's some communities that don't want outsiders, and that's perfectly fine. And the ones that I worked in, had invited us and did want us there and do want to share their story, because they want to save the caribou.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Thank you, Katie. And now it is my pleasure to turn over the mantle to Eli Reed. Thank you, Eli.
Okay. I guess I'm going to get this started here. Oops. First of all, that what they just saw and heard just now was pretty amazing, and so it's so important, that I guess the inhabitants of this planet have done a pretty bad job saving the planet. So thank you for showing what you just did. My story is from what I did it became very personal, which very quickly. This is what I think we were going toward St. James Parish, and this is my noble assistant, Lauren, was driving, and I'm in the car, and I saw this just split second. You know, I think
We're not seeing it yet.
I'm not seeing it. Oh, that's not good. Okay, try.
Hold on.
Okay, let's.
Oh, there we go.
There we go.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay. Anyway, what happened is we're driving toward St. Paris Terrace, and and I see this thing in the front of me, and I took a couple of frames, and the story is sort of more personal than I first thought, because when my mother, when I was born, I was born in Linden, New Jersey, and there's a lot of factories around there and that kind of thing. And then their house burned down, and we ended up coming to Perth Amboy, New Jersey. It's where I grew up at. And the thing that was interesting is that the first place we grew up was like a 2-story, and I don't mean a big 2-story, I mean a small place, a house that was almost beneath Outer Bridge. And what happened is that there's factories just on the other side of the Outer Bridge. So it's like we had moved there when I was like, I guess I was 4 years old. And what happened is, you can smell the air. It's like impossible not to. And meanwhile, you're young, you go on doing what you need to do as a child. And eventually what happened when I was 12 years old, my mother passed away. And we moved from the area where we were living at to a little bit further away from the factories. And for the longest time, I wondered why my mother had passed away, because she didn't drink, she didn't smoke or anything like that. And it came to New Orleans area where I found out. I mean, that was a pretty good, she died of liver cancer, and I thought there's a good chance that that happened to be, that where she lived at was before I was born, where I was born. Maybe that's what had happened. I ended up working in a hospital in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. And that was sort of another education. I was always reading, looking at everything, information, everything I could. I was just a curious kid, right? And the things started to come together in a way for me. That's probably the reason why I'm a photographer, a journalist. And the people that are going through what they're going through there, it's like the African Americans are just going out like this is a terrible way. And the human side, from looking at that first on that roadway, it became more and more important. And the names of the people, remember, written down here, can't forget them. But this is not just, it's not just one person, it's a whole group of people, things happening to. This is one of the first frames I took from a moving car on a bridge. And that's the Mississippi River. That's and all of a sudden you're back to your childhood in a way. I mean, when I grew up, I always thought that at one point somebody was going to drop a match in Perth Amboy and Perth Amboy was going to blow up. The Perth Amboy was a good place for me growing up. I mean, people were good. The high school, they were supportive. And I grew up in the Delaney Homes housing project, which was, I didn't know this, but it was the toughest, considered to be the toughest place in Perth Amboy, and Delaney Homes. And there's all kinds of people, Black, white, Latino, I mean, everything there. And we know you live together. And that's also one of the reasons why I kept on wanting to do projects like this. Was not just a project. It becomes the things that you have to do. And I mean, I didn't like this picture at first because I didn't feel like it was whatever, but it was exactly what is whatever. The Mississippi River, and there's that horrible looking sky going on there. This woman, she had a couple of things going on. It's Caitlin Joshua, and that's her daughter. And she had some issues that she had to get through that. You wonder, why does anyone get sick? And then you find out how much is being done by factories or the atmosphere and everything else like that. And most people don't understand that. They, even like if you grow up in a place like that, maybe there's a joke going on that, oh, anybody strikes a match, we're all done for here, or something like that. But she was one of the people one of the first people I photographed, I think. Yeah. Then you see sugarcane. Now, my family originally, most of the family grew up in Georgia, and working with sugarcane and everything else. But this is, the factories. So this photograph to me was an important statement in itself, because this poison is going into the sugarcane, and who knows what you get sugar in your tea or coffee or what have you, and it could be poisoning yourself. And that it was sort of surrealistic to me looking at it. How could that be? Never imagined from the time I first saw sugarcane in Georgia to see it in these factories, with all the kind of stuff coming out. There's the grandson, I think it was grandson of a gentleman. I'm not going to try to, your names will be here all night and day and everything else. I was also trying to get a sense, driving through, trying to figure out how to make a photograph that captured. It's almost an evil thing. Now we know that you need industry to be able to progress with certain directions, but all of a sudden I saw that car there, and I thought, that's a statement in itself. Surrounded. I mean, that to get that car, maybe you're going to see some kind of industry doing their stuff, and meanwhile poisoning you. There are people who are living. This is a lady who wrote the who did the poetry, and what
Barbara Faber.
Barbara Faber. How can I forget that name? Barbara Faber. She, it's a wonderful thing. It said things so wonderfully, and I do poetry myself. But after seeing that, I said, maybe I should do something with that, because there's so many things you experience in life, and I think that was such a good thing. So Barbara, thank you for that. And trying to capture a photograph of her in a place that's, I don't know, I go their instincts just go for it, And these are two twins who are the people who are working, fighting this stuff, and they're involved in a lot of things, and they work together. And it's two twins, and there's like two different looks there. Humanity is an interesting visit, I think, and it was just every photograph I made, I kept thinking about what am I missing, and the thing is the way those factories are working, that's killing humanity in never ways for a profit, and that's a normal thing, really. But can't there be a better way of doing that? And I think one or both of them were sick at some point. I'm turning to Lauren, who's sitting next to me. Just no one's going to get through that without being affected in some way. You're sort of lucky. Like growing up in her family, I felt I was lucky, and you keep on moving, keep on trying to think, keep living. And this is one of the scenes. To me, it's like seeing deposits of hell all over the place. And of course, the factories they have people working there, but they can't live in the city that this poison is spewing out. I don't think there's so much thing of that they concerned for their workers, but the concern that their workers won't be there if they're living there. Maybe it costs more, whatever. But things that are simple seem not so simple anymore. And this is a mother and daughter. The daughter, I think, had a number of miscarriages because of being there. And part of the mother was a leader in the group there. Rice, yeah. And that was the first photographs I made were of her daughter while the film crew was working and trying to, they disturbed that, of course. And I think they're really fighters. You remind me of people like in countries that are being trod on by government or by groups that they have no control over, but you still have to fight. You can't just give it up. And this was one of the photographs I made of her. She's sort of visionary. If you saw the video, you get an appreciation of who she is and what they're doing and trying to do. And I mean, I was waiting for a while because, well, I won't give the reason why, but I was waiting for a while before I could make this photograph. And then, you know, it's like all of a sudden everything fell into place. And what I was going to do, planning to do, was not going to be what should be done. So that's her daughter. That's you know, she was the first person I photographed, and they're there. And this was trying to. I mean, there's so much pain in there. It can make you cry just because what she's gone through. And so I just made a lot of photographs of her, but the photographs all kept on coming down to this. I mean, what she's gone through and what other people are going through continuously. This is another photograph of the factory. We're in a car going toward it, and not so nice. The kind of force they try to keep you from doing what you're doing. This is another woman who had a number of how many operations did you have? You know,
She's a breast cancer survivor.
Breast cancer survivor, right?
And many other issues, I think,
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah. So, but she's another one of the fighters, and so I mean, joyful in spite of what she's gone through, the human spirit. And this woman, this is her grandson. The grandson, yeah. She's like she's like fascinating in a way, because this is on the last day I think was shot, and she's connected with the neighborhoods. They're working. The people are working in groups to try to fight this thing. And her son, her grandson, is already. I think he was looking at me, but he's also looking at this stuff that's going on. That's her granddaughter or her daughter.
I think so. I'm
Yeah,
not sure.
Can't remember, but this is like you know, you're trying to photograph the human spirit, really, you know, and transferring it to the kids. And this kid is very aware, and you know, I wonder if that's what I was wondering when I was living in her family, and that's what is that smell? That smell that's constantly there, you know. And she was talking about some of the things that had happened and what they're going through. And so that's what this photo is about, memory. And this is the other side of the deal. You got to keep your spirits up. You cannot forget what's going on. And I think, as you saw the work before I came to speak, that's saying it very loudly in a difficult situation too. And so you almost feel fortunate when you don't have to go through, you know, things. But my thing was like when I was young, growing up and learning about this stuff now. This woman, she's a professor at the university, Kimberly Terrell, you know, she's a PhD in research, and she was very impressive, you know. And it's that's what you need, all kinds of fighters to deal with this stuff. It's not where you can walk away and say, you know, you can contribute money that could help, you know, but it's really got to have it inside its spirit that there's people on the grounds fighting what's going on, just getting information. That's another photograph I made. I saw the you know, the trees, and wonder how many different ways can you kill the earth, you know, really, when it comes down to it. So this woman was really amazing. You know, she's older and she's gone through a lot of things too. I can't remember them all. That's the thing, you know, maybe because I'm getting older, but I remember the faces and the pain that people have gone through, you know, and that's trying to capture that spirit of what was there and what's coming. And the father, that's his daughter. He had 4 operations or something. I think something 4 operations because of the you know, the poison, the stuff that's coming through there. And he's a very, very good, active person. And And this is just a scene in the neighborhood. Like if I grew up in Delaney Homes, this could have been Delaney Homes, different buildings, but it keeps on coming down to people that live and they're trying to live and they're trying to struggle, trying to do what they could do. That could have been me, except I didn't have a bike. I never had a bike. And it's just trying to touch on that, the normal, so-called normal parts of life to be able to help tell the story. This I thought was amazing. You knew we had to get some kind of photograph of the neighborhood with these three kids. This little kid on the right, that looks like maybe a camera, or maybe she's imagining she has a camera. I said, good for her. I mean, that's absolutely, there's a future gymnastic wonder, and then just here's maybe a baseball player, tennis player, who knows? But yeah, I love this photograph, this moment. It's like something that something could work. And there's a gentleman again. He's talking. He's in his house. I think his house is like in disrepair from some kind of hurricane that came through. Or yeah, and it's just you're hearing stories, and yet people are still fighting a good fight. And this is, to me, I've never looked at sugarcane the same way again. I mean, you don't see the factories there, but the factories are there. I think this was the first time we were driving and we're talking about that, and it just had to stop. And it's very surrealistic. I look at those. Why did I take this picture? Because it's there. Because those circles of light to me are circles of life. That's going. It's going someplace that shouldn't be. And this is my friend again. This is I think 4 of his relatives are in there, if I'm not mistaken.
His family's buried there.
His family's buried there. And there was a security guy who came out to try to discourage them, but they happen to be in this place where they're surrounded by the factories. And the factories they tried to get them out and they can't do it. They were there before, there's a cemetery there. And so they couldn't do that. But this is at the end of the sort of a late afternoon, I think it was. And I just remember when he was walking just a little bit ahead and says, I'm trying to figure out how to show where they're at. It's not a simple thing as it might look like. It's not just like snapshot. It's like trying to get in the spirit of what he was feeling. And the security guy was discouraged, shall we say, intelligently, no violence, and it was able to make the frame. So this is surrealistic to me because it's like you're going into a very dark place. From the time I got there, it's not because of the weather, but this weight that's on you or on the people who live there. And it's a fight. You can't give up the fight. If I'd lived there, I would have been very involved in it, whether I was a photographer or not, because it's stealing future lives that are not right. And there's just seems like there's so many places to try to prevent people that should be a little bit more caring. I think. They have this thing where if you are working there, that you can't live there because they don't want to lose their people, I guess, that way.
It's opposite. If you live there, you can't work at the factory.
Yeah, if you live there, you can't. Okay, you get the picture. Trying to get it right up there. Okay. And this last picture, the lady, she's just absolutely amazing. She was the last person I photographed. And just the spirit and the things I'm not going to go into the history of what she's gone through, but she to me represents the people, the fight, the intelligent fight to save life. It's not just saving life, your own life. It's like about the planet, and the little parts of the planet got to be saved, and maybe other people. It's so important. It's so important. I'm not saying it very well because I'm thinking of too many things I can't get out of my head right now. Could you? But it's yes, this is like an endless war, peaceful war. So you got to imagine things more than we're at. I don't have much else to
Yeah.
say. Okay.
There you go.
All
But-
right.
I'm extremely biased, but they're just so unbelievably beautiful. Eli, thank you. I am moved to tears every single time I see these photographs. You did such an unbelievably incredible job of capturing everything about this area. And for our, discussion here, the fossil fuels that are the source of the climate crisis in an area that is both being ravaged by the fossil fuel industry and the impacts of the climate crisis at the same time. And I just need to thank you again for just your brilliance in these photographs. We went a little over in the presentation part on this part, Eli, but I want to see if there's just a quick question, and if not, we'll move on to the next presentation and save questions for later. Okay, great. I think people are feeling the stun of the imagery and taking it in. And so thank you, Eli. We'll come back for questions at the end and move on now to Jamey Stillings. Thank you so much, Jamey.
Jamey, unmute yourself.
Yeah, I'm there. I did want to share the screen before I did the other. So hopefully this shows for everybody. You can see that. So thank you, first of all, Glenn and Justin, for including me in this. And Katie, Eli, I've admired your work for a long, long time. It's an honor to be on this with you today. And Antonia, I'm just learning more about your work. Thank you for being our curator of the event. So I've been working since the late 2010 on a project that has come to be called Changing Perspectives, Renewable Energy in the Shifting Human Landscape. And I just want to give you an overview of what I'm going to do today. I'm going to run you through a project called Ivanpah Solar, a few looks at Crescent Dunes, a little bit of work in Japan, and then we'll end up looking at the Atacama project, and then a few thoughts and conclusions at the end of that to bring it to fore. First, a couple technical questions to get out of the way. Okay, I predominantly use helicopters and airplanes. I have my camera on a gyroscope. I used a Nikon D800 from 2012 to 2019, and I use a Fujifilm GFX 100 from 2019 to the present. My favorite f-stop is 2 steps down from wide open on most lenses, and 1,000th of a second or faster whenever possible. So we'll get on with that. So here's a little look at helicopters that I've used along the way, including some that get parked behind love hotels in Japan. Here's a flight crew, one of my flight crews down in the Atacama. And here's us up in the air. So why Ivanpah Solar? Back in 2010, I wanted to combine my interest in the intersection of human interaction with the landscape and environmental issues. And Ivanpah Solar was scheduled to be the largest concentrated solar project in the world when it was completed. So I was able to take a picture from before it began and follow it all the way through to the end. Now, I think that documentary storytellers, when we're lucky, we often identify compelling stories before other people do. And we invest in the story, whether we know it's going to pay off or not. I contracted or talked with Bright Source Energy and Bechtel about trying to get collaboration and access on this project. I finally walked away from that because I could not get the access that I needed to do a project on the ground and in the air. And so this project this is the one exception, when New York Times magazine commissioned me to do some work. But what I basically did was a project from the air for the entire time. Now, the other thing that's interesting is that the technologies and the costs of energy production change rapidly. So from the time this project was planned until it became a reality, we saw the cost of wind and photovoltaic drop precipitously. The term fracking of gas came into our vernacular, and the entire economics of renewable energy was turned on its head. Now, I was fortunate about 1.5 years into the project to approach the New York Times magazine. And it was actually a down day when I was kind of like when am I going to share this with somebody? But fortunately, the magazine, Kathy Ryan and others were supportive of going out and doing a few more shoots. And so essentially when I'm halfway into the project, I get a feature in the magazine, and that propelled the project forward from that point on. And so I followed it through until the end. And I think one of the things that came to the fore also in this was that there's also always nearly a tension between local picture and big picture environmentalists. In this case, avian mortality and desert tortoise. The desert tortoise is a threatened species. And at the same time, if we don't do anything about the big picture for climate change, in 20 years, this area will not be desert tortoise terrain. So there was a compromise there, $56 million dedicated to the protection and study of the desert tortoise over the life of this project. Now, I was fortunate enough to be able to turn this body of work into a book. It also was collected by the Library of Congress. I was also, through this whole process, able to actually come up expense-wise ahead of what the project cost me. And my goal is not to make money off of a project, but to be able to have funds to push towards future work. So then I went to Crescent Dunes, and Crescent Dunes was related to Ivanpah, except that it was a concentrated solar project with molten salt storage. The idea behind that is you take a project where instead of having to immediately release that energy to the grid, you can collect the thermal energy of the sun and you can distribute it at nighttime, during the daytime, whenever you want. So it can work in a complementary fashion to photovoltaic and wind projects. The challenge, of course, is when you are making the first project at scale. This is by far the largest concentrated solar project with storage at the time. Contractors had issues. There were a number of issues. They missed deadlines. And the end result is this project is making power, but not in the way we envisioned it. And it essentially shut down the concentrated solar work in the United States. There are a dozen of these projects in China. There are multiple throughout the Middle East, but this is the last one that was built in the United States, and that's back in 2015 when it was finished. Now, what I want to tell you on that is Ivanpah, I was able to see that body of work eventually get out to 2 or 3 dozen publications around the world. With this project, which is smaller and briefer, I did get a few opportunities to publish it, but not nearly as widely. But again, the combination of everything allowed me to put funding towards future work. And the place that I put that funding towards initially was to look in Japan. So I had the opportunity to be a guest artist for the Mount Roko Photo Festival in Kobe, Japan. And I thought this is an appropriate time to go ahead and try to do a project about renewable energy. After the earthquake, after the tsunami, there was this closing down of nuclear power plants and the desire to promote renewable energy in Japan. Visually, it could not be more different than the landscape of the American West. And one of the things I particularly loved is how they would find former quarries. They would find sites next to industrial zones. And this is a former golf course. And then my favorites were really because there are literally thousands of ponds and reservoirs throughout Japan, floating photovoltaic projects. And they are just amazing to me. But yes, you can imagine a complexity to a project like this that just doesn't compare with what I had been used to. So again, what I found is when I started to go internationally, I had less opportunity to publish this work. In fact, probably the best exposure was in Newsweek Japan. But getting people to pick it up in the United States, I presume a lot of it is there are a lot of things to cover, but there's also perhaps a national bias. We're very ethnocentric in how we are. And so I felt a real diminishment of the ability to move this story out into the world. Now, I just want to take a moment because those of you who work on long-term projects, you got to know this little diagram that I've made. So basically, looking on the left, you see brainstorming, research, planning, logistics, funding, everything that goes into a project before you ever go out in the field, before you ever take a photograph. And then for me anyway, especially being in the air, there's this tiny little period of time when I get to be out working on the project, when I get to be up in the air. And that's the time when all of the information that I have behind me, I need to have it in my brain, but I need to see, and I need to be in the flow to look at imagery, to try to create imagery that will communicate what I want to do. And of course, then you come back, and that's when the real work begins: editing, imaging, printing, finding ways to publish it, finding ways to exhibit it. So I just wanted to share that because I think we all know it, but kind of to see it concretely is really important. So that brings me to Atacama, renewable energy and mining in the high desert of Chile. Why did I want to go to the Atacama? Well, it, for me, was this very interesting nexus of mining and renewable energy that was happening down there. Basically, we use Chilean copper and lithium every day of our lives in our homes, our cars, our computers, and smartphones. About a third of the world's copper comes from Chile, and Chile is the second largest exporter of lithium. So we're intrinsically tied to these materials. Now, traditionally, the mining industry has been dependent on imported fossil fuel. Here's a copper mine. This is one of the most productive ones, Zaldívar. It's also one of the first ones that converted to 100% renewable energy. But now to get an idea of scale here, look at this little pickup truck in the bottom right corner, and you see a 350-ton haul truck bringing up ore from below or overburden. Lithium mines throughout, especially the Salar de Atacama, where the majority of the mining is done in Chile. But here are ships that are coming in that are bringing coal that's going to be used to make electricity and to have that electricity go into the mainland, into the mining companies. And so this was the traditional structure that used this imported fossil fuel in order to run the mining industry. Well, about 2016 or so, the cost curve crossed, and all of a sudden it was less expensive to build renewable energy, photovoltaic and wind projects than it was to make electricity from coal. And so all of a sudden, the tremendous wind and solar capacity of the Atacama, some of the very, very best in the entire world, could be utilized first to power the mining industries, but second, to draw that energy down to population centers in central and south Chile. This project, for instance, El Romero, is one of the prime suppliers of energy to the Google data center in Santiago. So this project happened in two phases. First, in 2017, I did a body of work, and that body of work was to be turned into a book. There are a few things that happen. You get busy, you don't get it done. And all of a sudden, we had this other thing called a pandemic. And so over the course of the pandemic, what we were able to do was to pull together all of the essays, all of the text, the translations, everything we needed to do, and deliver a finished design of the book in December of 2020. Well, all of the things that happened, pandemic, paper shortages, backup. This book happened to be published by Steidl, second time with Gerhard. And it took until March of last year, 13 months ago, before I got on press. And in that interim, that space between those two events, I felt it was important for me to go down to Chile, because in that 5-year period of time, from 2017 to 2022, they had tripled their renewable energy capacity in the country. Now, what had happened? I got one round, basically, of the 2017 work being published. A beautiful essay by Bloomberg Business Week, Clinton Cargill, thank you. But in general, I did not have a whole lot of luck in bringing this story out into the world. Lots of things that we can think about that pertain to that and pertain to how we get stories out into the press these days, but I'll save that for later. But at any rate, I went back down in 2022. The project that you just saw a moment ago was now completed in making power. New wind projects throughout the area, new photovoltaic projects. So it was amazing to look at that, as well as to visit mines that I had not been able to visit before, lot of military restrictions and things like that that I needed to work around. So I had additional opportunities when I went down in 2022. So as a result, it was impossible to bring this imagery into the book. The book is all 2017, but with texts updated to the present so that they were relevant to the fact that we had a pandemic, that Chile had a new president, that their constitution, their reformed constitution referendum was voted down. We tried to bring all of that into the book. But all of these are the images from 2022. So finally, we have the book. The book came out, like I said, it was printed in March of last year. It came out in July of last year, so it's been out a little less than a year. A few conclusions. So first of all, telling our stories has never been more challenging or more possible. I think there are a multitude of information modes to slice and dice our attention. We feel it ourselves. Our audience feels it as well. There are fewer traditional publications, and there's a shifting culture within them. Exclusivity, it's a storyteller's nightmare. You know, any story that goes to the New York Times or goes into the New Yorker or any other publication, it is on the homepage for maybe a week, and then it disappears, just like that magazine that you used to have. It is gone. And unless somebody remembers, oh, renewable energy, Chile, or, oh, what was that guy's name? Stillings, or whatever, they will not be able to find your story. So, and I also feel very much that past performance, as in, you know, having the story published widely and internationally, is no guarantee of future performance. It's like that old investment thing. Past performance is no guarantee of future results. Now, I'm a stubborn optimist. That's a term from Christiana Figueres. And what that means is I believe that we do have a way to work forward, to take advantage of possibilities and opportunities, to work our way out of climate change challenges and to create an opportunity and a sustainable Earth for future generations. However, that doesn't mean I'm oblivious to the challenges that we have. I feel very strongly that knowledge does not equal wisdom. We have a lot of knowledge. We gain a lot of knowledge. Technology is advancing very, very rapidly. But, and I didn't make this up, wisdom is knowledge aptly applied. So it's not that we have this knowledge, that we have this technology. It's how we choose to use it over time. And my biggest fear is that we are not being wise about how we use our technology, how we use our resources. So to me, there are three big things that still remain for me when I'm thinking about my project, how it might move forward, how it might change over time. The first is global human population growth. It's tripled in my lifetime practically. A consumption-dependent culture and society. This is something nobody will talk about. I don't care how often you listen to Al Gore, he will not bring up that we are totally dependent on consuming. Your job and my job are dependent upon that. And third, that we are going to we are in a linear single use of resources. You know, there's an aluminum plant up in Iceland, and it makes raw aluminum up there. And Americans throw away 4 times as many beverage cans as that plant produces every single year. They don't get recycled. So our future, I do believe, is one of possibilities and opportunities. What ideas do you have to make the world a better place? What challenges are you willing to take on? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamey. And thank you, Katie, Eli, and Jamey. We've got some really wonderful questions in the chat, which I'm going to turn to in a moment. But I also actually want to take, given our time, the facilitators' ability to shift things a little bit. And I want to jump back to Eli real quick with a question, and then we'll go back to the chats. Eli, your photographs focused on photographing people in some of the most difficult circumstances we can imagine within this context of fossil fuels and the climate crisis. How do you capture the inner struggle within an individual when you're doing your photography? Can you tell us some of your tips and tools of the trade?
Really, it's like when you're working on these things, it's not about you. And by the way, thank you for inviting me. I mean, you're incredible. I mean, it's really, you got to get rid of the ego thing if you're having problems with it. I don't. I've seen enough stuff, and I still think about people I've seen, wonder what's going on with them now. It's a very basic human thing. You have to lose arrogance, you know, and a lot of times it may be there, you're not even aware of it. And so I think I worked in Prayer Family General Hospital for 5 years while I was going to art school. And then I worked for 6 years at St. Vincent's Cancer Ward. And, you know, it's all those things that they contribute to understanding about, I think, the deepness of human beings. I actually gave blood to a couple of patients, and I can't remember what thing, I worked at Prayer Family General. And the other things that happened that just open your eyes. And the world has a lot of really good people. I've enjoyed my fellow presenters today. I mean, just this amazing work. It's inspiring. I can't even hardly say it. So I try to let the human part exist, which means you may end up crying by yourself, but you get that little pump to keep going. And you can't, well, I can't say you can't share this stuff. I try to, when I talk to my students at the University of Texas, I really tried to share that inner spirit. I even had one class I called the Zen Walk, and asked, what do you see? In the first 7 years, one person got it, and she was in there she wasn't like a serious photographer. She's into cooking and food and stuff like that. She got excited and started making photographs for real, you know. But it's those basic things that connect you with the world we live in and the world beyond what we live in. You know, I always trying to listen and letting it come to you. You can say, well, this is what I'm going to do, and it's like that's not always the case. You know, like I haven't really pushed my work maybe the way I should have, but I figure if I do the right thing, I don't even think about it. I just get it out, because there's so many reasons you can be stopped from doing things. So if you're really serious about something, keep your ears and your nose and everything open, and listen to people who are around you who you don't know. I mean, I've learned so much today, just the two partners here. It's like inspiring. It's inspiring. And it's like, that's the thing, like you get over your own inspiration thing and absorb what's coming to you, because it's coming to you fairly in different kinds of ways, which you cannot imagine, you know. So that's the major part of it, and to appreciate the people around you, appreciate the people, what they can do, and things that you never conceived of, you know, and that'll keep you going for a while until it's time to join your ancestors, hopefully. So that's about it. I mean, I can't think of any more complicated things, except music is wonderful to hear, listen to when you're creating things. And there's a lot of people out there that have like, you know, I'm not even going to those stories because it's like too much, but it's an amazing life that we live if we choose to understand that. And so if we understand that, and you notice that there's a place that we should be thinking about, and in the time of darkness, of time you're going to go to sleep, time you wake up, thank you, God, I'm awake, you know, and continue working on things that mean something to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Eli. We have wonderful questions in the chat. I'm going to jump over to one from Katie that can go to both Jamey, that can go to any speaker actually, but we'll start with Jamey. And that is, and what advice would you give to a photographer working on a long-term project for social change about reaching out to people and convincing them to be a part of a project with no guarantee that anything will happen with it, just a hope that it'll be published? I think we've all faced that problem.
Yeah, that is, I mean, I hear it every day. And my partner and wife, Esha Kyokyo, questions that when she's working with projects. I question it. I think the most important thing is really you go at it with a ton of energy and sincerity. You have to believe in the importance of your project, often when other people don't. And in your approach, you have to find a way, for people to trust you. And maybe honesty and candor about this. I am working to get this message out. I don't have a guarantee of it right now. But for instance, I did a project called the Bridget Hoover Dam, and at the front end of it, everybody was skeptical about it. And then when the New York Times Magazine published a single photograph in the middle of the Great Recession, it gave cred back to that project. And from that point on, I got a lot more collaboration. So sometimes that ability to share in some way where people can see the validity of what you're doing will help strengthen the project as you move forward.
Katie, that same question to you.
Yeah, I think that was an excellent answer. I think maybe, and then just on a personal level with people that you're working with, sharing photos, I think means everything. And I think just it's so simple, and everybody's got phones and they've got their Facebook accounts, and let them use your pictures as well. Let the community use the photos for what they might need to use it for. I'm not saying give your photos away for free to a corporation, but definitely give them to the people who you're photographing. I think that goes a long way. Yeah, and then if it comes out, send the magazine back to the folks who helped make it happen. And I think that that just sort of snowballs and really helps make this work.
And I'm going to pull from the question that Jen asked directly to Katie, but also present it to all of you. I'll start with you, Katie, and then go to Eli, and then end with Jamey. And that, to try and apply it to everyone, Jen asked at the end of their question, I would love to hear your advice about how you approach asking questions to Inupiaq communities as an outsider. And I think that would apply to anywhere you all operate. How do you figure out how to really approach a community that might not otherwise be necessarily open to being photographed?
Yeah, I think, as I mentioned before, time is a big part of it, but also, I've been working in the region for about a decade, and every time I forget that I talk too fast. There's certain things that I do, and just sort of remembering things like, slow down and listen. Listening is huge, but also just sort of, kind of trying to adapt as much as you can to other folks' pace. And sometimes you think you thought you asked a question and you don't, and then you didn't get an answer, but you realize 4 days later you did get an answer. So I think there's just, people have such a different way of communicating, but just kind of just being present, and like hanging out, making friends, playing sports. Like, I think just time and spending time with people makes a really big difference with that. But then really having your research done well beforehand, like understanding the history of the community, so they don't have to explain so much to you that might not be things that they want to talk about. So just kind of also coming in very, very prepared is also helpful. But I'd love to hear what Eli and Jamey have to say.
Yeah, thank you. Eli, next to you.
Yeah, well, I read a lot all the time. We just take all kinds of information in. I had a friend when I lived in Detroit for a couple of years working for the newspaper, and the building I lived in, there was a little store at the bottom, and I became friends with the son of the owner, and he was very upset, and it's just sort of strange. And what happened is that his family had come from Lebanon. The Civil War was going on, and they end up in Detroit. And so it actually was make me wonder, about how people survive in those kind of instances. So I ended up Bridget wanted to do something in South America, not Central America, on death squads. Wondering what the heck is that about? Why could you drive yourself to do this? So I had this idea to do a story, but that was not really practical. My paper had gone through some stuff. So I'd lost a photographer, and I didn't realize I was new to the paper. I knew the story, but I forgot. Anyway, did a project that really was wonderful. It was one of the best things I ever worked on, covering Central America. And the thing it leads to Lebanon. I go up into mountains, the hills that cover this battle, and there's 5 guys, they came out to greet me, and they were not, very trustful of me. And it said, "There's nothing for you here. There's no guns. There's no soldiers. There's nothing for you here." And I said, no, that's okay. I just want to figure out what's here. And they looked at each other. Did he hear what we just said? You know, and they said, we said there's nothing for you here. I said, I understand that, you know. And then a car comes up. A family that ran out of money, were down in town in Beirut, but they ran out of money, had to come back to this village. And so what happened is one of the fighters, he's sort of the grandfather or his baby that was coming in there. And there was so much love going on. I just started filling up. I didn't ask questions. I just started. And they sort of understood. They liked the way I did that. And then they invited me to have a meal with them. And then the guys were coming all over the place. I didn't see before, firing shots down the street. The streets were pretty empty because it was dangerous. And one guy even said, "Hey, you want to take a shot?" I said, "I don't shoot guns right now. I shoot cameras." And then somebody fired a shot behind me, right behind me, just for fun. And I just had to laugh. I just had to laugh. This is so crazy. But they accepted me on their grounds. I mean, you go in, you got to be respectful of who you're talking to and appreciative that they're. And I'm always more interested in that part, where they're coming from, than I am necessarily than what I'm about to photograph. But it sort of comes together, and that was a really good example of what I should do, since I didn't speak Arabic. And I was relatively new to, Lebanon. I really loved the place and thought about actually moving there because the people. I made friends with a police officer. He didn't speak English. I didn't speak Arabic. But every Wednesday, when it was possible, I'd meet with him and his buddies. They didn't speak English either. So, we'd have a beer or something like that. The connection. We laughed. Just the normal things of life. Even though there is a language, and maybe it's not always to the words, but there's a connection there. So.
Wonderful, thank you. Glenn, can we have a minute for Jamey and then turn it over to you to wrap up? Or do we have to? You're muted, Glenn.
Of course.
Okay, wonderful. Jamey, please, and then we'll turn it over to Glenn to wrap us up.
Well, I basically want to echo what Katie and Eli said. I'm going to just share one image real quickly. And this is from my master's thesis in 1981. And what I would say is time is the most important thing. Time spent in the location, time spent with people. This is a family that I still know 43 years later. Half of them are in Texas, half of them are in Nicaragua. This is a point after spending days with them where the camera disappeared, where their life went on. And when I brought the camera up to my eye, nothing changed. That's, to me, the most important essence of what we do. And I certainly see it in the work of Katie and Eli, and I'm very thankful that you are committed that way.
Thank you.
Right. Well, thank you, everybody. If you want to unmute yourself and give an applause to all the presenters, that would be great. I really want to thank the presenters. I want to thank Antonia for doing an outstanding job moderating. I want to thank Justin Dalaba, and I want to thank all of you for attending this event today. It's an important topic, and we saw some great photography to help us understand it better in many different ways. And look on the SDN website for upcoming events with the Visual Storytelling Festival. We've got many more ahead of us. We have a very exciting one next week on women changing the face of documentary photography. And this will be posted to our YouTube channel soon. And I'll send out an email to everybody who's registered for this event to let you know when the link is available. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Fantastic event. Thank you. Thank you very much. Bye-bye all.
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.